A tourist stole a ceremonial guard's jacket, thinking rules didn't apply to him. But when the crowd fell silent, everything changed. One commanding voice shattered his arrogance, leaving onlookers speechless at what happened next. Before we dive into this incredible story of respect and consequence, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell to never miss out on more powerful real-life stories that will leave you speechless. On a crisp autumn morning at Edinburgh Castle, where centuries of Scottish history stood carved in ancient stone, Marcus Thompson maintained his post with unwavering dedication. The towering granite walls of the castle loomed behind him, their weathered surfaces catching the golden rays of the early sun. As one of the Highland Guard's most distinguished members, his presence commanded respect without uttering a single word. Marcus cut an impressive figure in his meticulously maintained ceremonial uniform. The deep navy jacket adorned with polished silver buttons and intricate embroidery spoke of centuries of tradition. His broad shoulders carried the weight of both, the uniform and the responsibility it represented, with natural grace. The traditional Highland bonnet sat perfectly positioned atop his head, its feather plume swaying gently in the Scottish breeze. The morning crowd of tourists had begun to gather, their excited chatter echoing off the ancient stones. Cameras clicked incessantly as visitors from around the world captured their moments before the historic castle. Children pointed and whispered, some trying to catch Marcus's eye, but his steel blue gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his posture perfect, his discipline absolute. Among the usual tour groups and families, a particular cluster of visitors stood out. They were louder than the rest, their laughter more forced, their movements more dramatic. At their center was a man who seemed determined to make himself the main attraction of Edinburgh Castle that morning. James Roberts, a tech executive from Silicon Valley, carried himself with the particular air of someone who believed money could buy respect. His designer leather jacket, despite its obvious expense, looked garish against the castle's timeless backdrop. A golden watch flashed ostentatiously on his wrist as he gestured dramatically, regaling his companions with what he clearly thought were hilarious observations about the quaint Scottish traditions. His voice, touched with a hint of California drawl, carried far too loudly across the courtyard. "Look at this guy," James announced to no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Standing there like some kind of museum piece. He pulled out the latest iPhone, its case as flashy as its owner, and started recording. "Hey folks, watch this. I'm about to make this statue come to life." The surrounding tourists shifted uncomfortably. A middle-aged woman in a sensible raincoat shook her head disapprovingly, while a young couple exchanged knowing glances. A group of local Scottish visitors near the castle entrance watched with growing concern, their expressions darkening at the obvious disrespect. Marcus remained motionless, his years of training evident in every steady breath. The wind picked up slightly, causing his jacket's medals to catch the sunlight, creating tiny beacons of honor that seemed to mock James's approaching figure. "Hey, Mr. Guard," James called out, his voice dripping with manufactured charm. "Don't you get hot in that fancy costume?" He circled Marcus like a predator, but the guard's stillness made it clear who truly commanded the space. "I bet that jacket cost more than my car. Well, maybe not my car, but you know what I mean." The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by James's theatrical performance. Phones emerged from pockets and bags, their cameras training on the scene. Unfolding before them, the morning air grew thick with tension as James stepped closer, his expensive shoes scraping against the ancient cobblestones. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mummy, why is that man being so mean?" Her mother pulled her closer, unsure of what would happen next, but certain it wouldn't be appropriate for young eyes. The castle's time-worn walls had witnessed centuries of Scottish history, from royal proclamations to military ceremonies. Now they stood silent, witness to a modern display of arrogance meeting tradition as James Roberts prepared to cross a line that would change the course of his carefully curated morning performance. Little did he know that his next action would not only shatter the morning's peace, but would also trigger a chain of events that would leave him wishing he'd never set foot on Scottish soil. James Roberts wasn't used to being ignored. Back in Silicon Valley, his reputation as a ruthless tech executive meant people jumped at his every word. Here, before Edinburgh Castle's ancient walls, his expensive watch and designer clothes seemed to have lost their power to command attention. This only fueled his determination to become the center of attention. "Hey everyone, watch this. I'm about to give you the most entertaining show of Scottish culture you've ever seen," James announced, his voice carrying an edge of manufactured enthusiasm that made several nearby tourists cringe. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, making sure his phone was still recording. The morning sun caught the diamond-studded watch on his wrist, sending fragments of light dancing across the cobblestones. Marcus Thompson, the Highland Guard, remained as still as the castle walls behind him. His presence spoke of generations of discipline and honor. Every thread of his navy ceremonial jacket told a story. The silver buttons polished to mirror-like perfection, the intricate embroidery representing centuries of Scottish military tradition, and the medals adorning his chest, each earned through dedication and service. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more striking. Marcus, with his precisely trimmed brown hair visible beneath his Highland bonnet, stood as an embodiment of dignity. His face, weathered by years of guard duty in Scotland's unpredictable weather, bore the kind of quiet strength that comes from unwavering dedication to duty. At 35, he had served in the Highland Guard for over a decade, earning respect through silence and steadfast service rather than hollow words. The growing crowd around them represented a microcosm of global tourism. Sarah Chen, a university student from Hong Kong, watched through her camera lens, her expression a mixture of fascination and concern. The MacDonald family, locals from Glasgow, stood near the castle entrance, their faces darkening with each of James's increasingly theatrical movements. Little Emma MacDonald, aged 7, clutched her father's hand tightly, instinctively sensing the building tension. "I bet this uniform is straight from some fancy London designer," James continued, circling Marcus like a shark. His audience had grown, much to his delight. A group of American tourists watched nervously, while a German tour group whispered among themselves, their guide looking increasingly uncomfortable. The morning air carried the faint sound of bagpipes from somewhere within the castle grounds, an ironically fitting soundtrack to the unfolding scene. A light drizzle had begun to fall, typical of Edinburgh weather, adding a glossy sheen to the cobblestones and creating an almost theatrical atmosphere. James's companions, a small group of Silicon Valley colleagues on a business trip, hung back. Thomas Chen, James's VP of marketing, watched with visible discomfort, knowing his boss's tendency to take things too far, but too afraid of losing his job to intervene. "James, maybe we should move on to the next part of the tour," he suggested, weakly, his voice lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. But James was too invested in his performance now. His Instagram live stream had attracted hundreds of viewers, and comments were pouring in. He played to his virtual audience with increasing bravado, his actions becoming more exaggerated with each passing moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, adopting the tone of a circus ringmaster, "what we have here is a perfect example of what I call outdated tradition. In Silicon Valley, we've moved beyond all this. We disrupt traditions. We don't preserve them." He laughed at his own joke, but the sound fell flat in the historic courtyard. Marcus remained motionless, but those close enough might have noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. His training included dealing with difficult tourists, But something about James's particular brand of disrespect struck a deeper chord. The medals on his chest, earned through years of service, seemed to gleam defiantly in the misty morning light. Among the onlookers, Castle Security Officer Claire Mackenzie watched from the shadows of an ancient archway. With 15 years of experience handling tourist incidents, she had developed a sixth sense for trouble. Her hand rested lightly on her radio as she observed James's increasingly bold performance. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now, their collective breath held in anticipation of what might happen next. Phones recorded from every angle, their owners somehow knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. The historic courtyard, which had seen centuries of Scottish history unfold, was about to become the stage for a very modern clash of values. James, emboldened by his growing audience, both physical and virtual, took another step closer to Marcus. His expensive leather shoes scraped against the ancient cobblestones as he leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that nevertheless carried across the now silent courtyard.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"You know what would make this show really viral?" he said, his eyes glinting with mischief behind his designer sunglasses. "If I tried on that fancy jacket of yours, I mean, how much could it really be worth? I could probably buy 100 of them with my quarterly bonus." The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Sarah Chen's finger hovered over her phone's record button, while little Emma MacDonald buried her face in her father's jacket. The morning mist seemed to thicken around them, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what would happen next. What no one in the crowd knew, not even James with all his Silicon Valley swagger, was that Marcus Thompson had not earned his position by chance. Behind his stoic exterior lay years of military service, including 2 tours of duty before joining the Highland Guard. His stillness wasn't just tradition, it was the calm of someone who knew exactly how to handle any situation. The stage was set, the players were in position, and in the next few moments James Roberts would learn a lesson about respect that no amount of money could buy. The ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed countless displays of human folly over the centuries, but what was about to unfold would be remembered in tourist stories and social media posts for years to come. The morning mist continued to swirl around the courtyard as James Roberts, intoxicated by his own sense of superiority, prepared to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Come on, people! Who wants to see me try on this fancy jacket?" James called out to his live stream viewers, his voice echoing off the castle walls. The comment section of his stream exploded with responses, some encouraging his behavior, others warning him to stop. "Look at these engagement numbers. We're going viral, folks." The crowd in the courtyard had grown larger still, forming a loose semicircle around the unfolding scene. Local tour guide Maggie McPherson, a woman in her 50s who had spent decades sharing Edinburgh's history with visitors, watched with growing concern. She'd seen her share of disrespectful tourists, but something about this felt different. "This is completely out of order," she whispered to a colleague, her Scottish accent thick with disapproval. "That uniform represents hundreds of years of history. It's not some costume for tourist entertainment." James continued his performance, each movement more exaggerated than the last. He pulled out his phone, switching to his front camera to capture himself in the frame with Marcus. "Let's see what my followers think about this traditional Scottish statue," he smirked, making air quotes with his fingers. "I bet we can make him move. Everything has a price, right?" The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Marcus Thompson's shadow stretched across the cobblestones like a silent guardian, while James danced around him like an oversized child testing boundaries. The contrast between Marcus's dignified stillness and James's theatrical movements couldn't have been more stark. Thomas Chen, James's VP of Marketing, made another attempt to intervene. "James, I really think we should respect the..." But his words were cut off by James's dismissive wave. "Respect? Come on, Thomas, we're in the disruption business. Besides, I've already paid a fortune for this luxury tour package. That practically makes me a part owner of this castle, right?" James's laugh echoed off the ancient walls, making several tourists wince. Near the back of the crowd, Claire Mackenzie had quietly radioed for backup. In her years as a security officer, she developed an instinct for when situations were about to escalate. She kept her movements subtle, not wanting to trigger any premature confrontation. James pulled out his wallet, thick with currency from various countries. "Hey, Mr. Guard, how much for a quick photo in that jacket? Name your price." He waved, a handful of high-denomination notes in Marcus's direction. "See, everyone? This is how business gets done in the real world." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Sarah Chen, still recording everything on her phone, noticed how the local Scottish visitors seemed to be getting increasingly agitated. The MacDonald family had moved closer to the front, Mr. MacDonald's face reddening with each of James's taunts. "Da, why is that man being so mean?" Little Emma MacDonald asked again, her voice carrying clearly in a momentary lull. The innocent question seemed to hang in the air, making several nearby tourists shift uncomfortably. James, however, seized on the child's voice as another opportunity for his performance. "Don't worry, little girl," he called out patronizingly. "I'm just showing everyone how silly all this tradition stuff is. In Silicon Valley, we believe in moving forward, not standing still like this guy." The bagpipes in the distance had stopped now, as if even the castle's traditional musicians were holding their breath. The morning mist had begun to lift, but a new tension had settled over the courtyard, thick and heavy as a Highland wool blanket. Marcus Thompson remained motionless, but those closest to him might have noticed a subtle change. His breathing, while still measured, had taken on a different rhythm. His eyes, while fixed ahead, had gained an intensity that spoke of carefully, controlled response rather than passive endurance. James, oblivious to these subtle signs, decided to escalate his performance. He pulled out his phone again, this time switching to a live streaming platform with an even larger audience. "Okay, everyone watching around the world, let's make this Ugard famous, 10,000 likes and I'll show you something really entertaining." The comments on his stream scrolled rapidly, a mix of encouragement and warnings. James read out the supportive ones with theatrical flair, ignoring the growing number of viewers telling him to stop. His designer sunglasses caught the light as he preened for the camera, his Silicon Valley confidence unwavering in the face of mounting disapproval. "You know what?" he announced, both to his physical and virtual audience. "I think it's time. We modernize this whole guard tradition. I mean, who needs ceremony in 2025? We've got AI, virtual reality, self-driving cars, and yet here we are, watching a guy stand still in a fancy jacket." The morning wind picked up slightly, causing Marcus's medals to clink softly against each other. The sound, barely audible, seemed to carry more weight than James's entire monologue. A few veteran tourists in the crowd, those who understood military honors, noticed that one of those medals was a Distinguished Service Cross. Claire Mackenzie received confirmation through her earpiece that additional security was on standby. She noticed how the crowd had unconsciously divided into two groups: those who were backing away, sensing the impending confrontation, and those who were moving closer, phones raised to capture whatever was about to happen. James, riding high on his streaming numbers and his own inflated sense of importance, made his final approach. "All right, world, watch this. I'm about to show you how much tradition really matters in today's world. Anyone want to place bets on whether our friend here will still play statue when I..." His voice trailed off as he reached for the first silver button on Marcus's ceremonial jacket. The morning sun caught the polished metal, creating a brief flash of light that seemed to signal the point of no return. The crowd held its collective breath, phones recording from every angle as James Roberts prepared to learn exactly how wrong he'd been about the price of disrespect. The atmosphere in Edinburgh Castle's courtyard crackled with tension like the air before a Highland storm. James Roberts' fingers hovered near the silver button of Marcus Thompson's ceremonial jacket, the morning light catching his diamond-studded watch as he prepared to cross a line that generations of visitors had known better than to approach. "Last chance to move, Mr. Traditional," James announced, his voice carrying a sing-song quality that made several onlookers cringe. His live stream had now attracted thousands of viewers, the comments flowing faster than anyone could read. "My followers are waiting for some real entertainment." The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people now, their collective presence creating an amphitheater of witnesses to what was about to unfold. The MacDonald family had been joined by other local Scottish families, their expressions a mix of concern and building anger. Mr. MacDonald's knuckles had turned white from gripping his daughter Emma's hand too tightly. "Someone should stop him," whispered Sarah Chen to no one in particular, her camera still recording every moment. Her social media followers were sending a stream of worried comments, but she couldn't look away from the scene unfolding before her. James began his final performance, playing to both his live audience and his streaming viewers. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a perfect example of outdated thinking. In Silicon Valley, we have a saying, "Move fast and break things." Well, today we're going to break this little tradition. His hand moved closer to Marcus's jacket, fingers reaching for the top button. The silver surface gleamed in the morning light, each detail of its military insignia clearly visible. The jacket itself seemed to represent everything James was determined to mock: tradition, discipline, respect. Claire Mackenzie's voice came through clear and professional on her radio. "Potential situation at North Gate. Subject attempting to interfere with guard. Stand by." Her years of experience told her that the next few moments would determine how this situation ended. Thomas Chen made one last desperate attempt to stop his boss. "James, please, this isn't Silicon Valley. We're guests here." But his words were drowned out by James's theatrical countdown. 10, 9, 8. James began playing to his stream. "Let's see how our statue friend handles a little disruption." His followers' comments were split between those egging him on and those begging him to stop, creating a digital mirror of the tension in the physical crowd. The morning mist had completely lifted now, leaving the scene in stark clarity. Every detail was visible: the pristine condition of Marcus's uniform, the smirk on James's face, the growing concern in the eyes of the onlookers. Even the ancient castle walls seemed to be watching with disapproval. 7, 6, 5. James continued, each number dripping with mockery. He turned to face his phone camera directly. "Watch this, everyone. I'm about to show you how to disrupt centuries of tradition with one simple move." In the crowd, Maggie McPherson, the veteran tour guide, had seen enough. She began moving toward the castle's main office, her steps purposeful. She knew every rule and regulation about visitor conduct, and she'd witnessed enough to ensure this wouldn't end well for the arrogant American. 4, 3. James was fully committed now, his Silicon Valley confidence unwavering. He'd built his career on pushing boundaries and breaking rules. In his mind, this was just another system to be disrupted, another tradition to be challenged. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying with it the faint sound of drums from somewhere. Within the castle grounds, the military tattoo was practicing for the evening's performance, providing an ironically appropriate soundtrack to the unfolding scene. 2. James's fingers were almost touching the button now. His live stream had exploded with activity, notifications pinging rapidly as more viewers joined to witness what they assumed would be an entertaining prank. What they didn't know, what James himself had failed to realize, was that Marcus Thompson's stillness wasn't the rigid pose of a ceremonial guard, but the controlled patience of a highly trained military veteran. Behind his steady gaze lay years of combat experience and disciplined response. One. James's voice carried a note of triumph as his fingers finally made contact with the silver button. The morning sun caught the polished metal one last time, as if nature itself was marking the moment when everything would change. In the sudden silence that followed, you could hear the collective intake of breath from the crowd. Phones were raised higher, cameras focused sharper, and time itself seemed to slow down as James Roberts prepared to learn exactly how wrong he'd been about the nature of power and respect. His fingers closed around the button, and with a theatrical flourish, he began to undo it. "Time to modernize this little tradition," he announced to his stream. "Watch how fast I can turn this guard into a viral sensation." The next few seconds would be replayed thousands of times on social media, analyzed in countless comments, and discussed in tour guide training sessions for years to come. But for those present in the courtyard that morning, what happened next would be burned into their memory with perfect clarity. The ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed centuries of Scottish history. But what happened next would be talked about in tour guide circles and social media for years to come. As James Roberts's fingers worked at the silver button of Marcus Thompson's ceremonial jacket, the morning air itself seemed to freeze with anticipation. "Look at this, everyone," James announced triumphantly to his live stream, his fingers successfully undoing the first button. "Your boy from Silicon Valley is about to make this guard's jacket go viral. Who wants to see me try it on?" His voice carried across the courtyard, bouncing off the castle walls like an unwelcome echo. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as James, emboldened by his initial success, moved to the second button. His designer sunglasses caught the light as he leaned in closer, his expensive cologne creating an incongruous cloud around Marcus's pristine uniform. "I could probably buy 100 of these jackets," James continued, his voice dripping with mock consideration. "Maybe I'll start a new fashion trend, Disrupted Heritage by James Roberts. How does that sound, statue man?" Claire Mackenzie's head tightened on her radio as she watched the scene unfold. Her backup was in position, but years of experience told her to wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes she knew justice was best served when the perpetrator was given enough rope to hang themselves. In the crowd, young Emma MacDonald buried her face in her father's jacket, unable to watch. Mr. MacDonald's face had turned a dangerous shade of red, matching many of the other Scottish onlookers who understood exactly what kind of sacrilege they were witnessing. The third button came undone under James's persistent fingers. "See how easy it is to disrupt tradition," he laughed, playing to his growing online audience. "In Silicon Valley, we have a saying, ask for forgiveness, not permission." That's when it happened. With movements so swift and precise, they seemed almost choreographed. Marcus Thompson's right hand shot up and caught James's wrist in a grip that spoke of years of military training. The motion was smooth, professional, and completely unexpected. The crowd gasped collectively. 100 phones captured the moment from every angle as James's smirk froze on his face, his sunglasses slipping slightly to reveal eyes widened in shock. "What the?" James started, but his voice trailed off as Marcus turned his head just slightly to look directly at him. The guard's eyes, previously fixed on the horizon, now bore into James with an intensity that made the tech executive's confidence waver for the first time. "Remove your hand." Marcus's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of centuries of military discipline. Each word was precisely enunciated, cutting through the morning air like a Highland sword. James, momentarily stunned, attempted to recover. With bravado, "Hey, look everyone, I got him to move. Mission accomplished." He tried to pull his hand away, but Marcus's grip remained firm, not painful, but immovable as the castle walls themselves. The crowd's murmuring had stopped completely. Sarah Chen's fingers trembled slightly as she kept recording, knowing she was capturing something extraordinary. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "This," Marcus continued, his voice still measured but carrying an authority that made several veterans in the crowd stand straighter instinctively, "is a ceremonial uniform of the Highland Guard. It is not a prop for your entertainment." James's live stream comments were exploding, but he couldn't read them. His phone had slipped from his grasp, dangling awkwardly from his wrist beneath Marcus's grip. The morning sun seemed to have lost its warmth as he stood there, caught between embarrassment and growing unease. "But I was just—" James began, his voice having lost its theatrical edge. The designer sunglasses slid further down his nose, revealing eyes that darted nervously between Marcus and the crowd. "You were just—" Marcus cut him off, each word precise as a military drumbeat, demonstrating a profound lack of respect for this uniform, this castle, and everything they represent. Claire Mackenzie moved forward now, her steps measured and professional. She'd seen enough to know exactly how to handle this situation. The morning light caught her security badge as she approached, adding official weight to what was already a powerful moment. In the crowd, Maggie McPherson nodded approvingly. She'd seen thousands of tourists come through these gates, but few had needed such a dramatic lesson in respect. This would become one of her favorite stories to share with future tour groups. James made one last attempt to salvage his dignity. "Do you know who I am?" He blustered, though his voice had lost its previous confidence. "I'm a Silicon Valley executive. I could buy this whole—" "Your wealth," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a note of finality that silenced James mid-sentence, "means nothing here. This uniform represents centuries of service, sacrifice, and honor, values that cannot be disrupted, bought, or mocked." The morning wind picked up slightly, causing the undone buttons of Marcus's jacket to sway accusingly. James's face had turned from confident to confused to increasingly concerned, as he realized just how badly he had misjudged the situation. What happened in the next few moments would be replayed millions of times on social media, shared across continents, and discussed in corporate training sessions about cultural sensitivity. The arrogant tourist who thought money could buy respect was about to learn a lesson that no Silicon Valley disruption could prepare him for. The sudden silence in Edinburgh Castle's courtyard was deafening. The moment hung suspended in the crisp Scottish air as Marcus Thompson, his grip still firmly but professionally holding James Roberts's wrist, stood as an embodiment of centuries of military discipline facing down modern arrogance. "Your three options," Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never needed to shout to be heard, "are to step back, apologize, or be escorted from the premises." Each word was measured, precise, carrying the weight of consequence that James had never experienced in his Silicon Valley bubble. The crowd had grown larger still, drawn by the palpable tension. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing what many would later describe as the perfect clash between tradition and entitlement. Sarah Chen's live stream had attracted thousands of viewers, her trembling hands struggling to keep the camera steady as the scene unfolded. James, his designer, sunglasses now hanging awkwardly from one ear, attempted to recover some semblance of his previous bravado. "Come on, man, it was just a joke. Don't you people understand viral marketing?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the growing realization that he had severely miscalculated. Claire Mackenzie stepped forward, her security uniform adding another layer of official presence to the scene. "Sir," she addressed James, her Scottish accent crisp and professional, I need you to understand the seriousness of your actions. The morning sun had risen higher, casting stark shadows across the ancient cobblestones. James's shadow seemed to have shrunk, while Marcus's stretched across the courtyard like a silent guardian of tradition. The undone buttons of the ceremonial jacket caught the light, each one a testament to James's monumental mistake. "Do you have any idea," Claire continued, her voice carrying clearly to the gathered crowd, "that interfering with the Highland Guard's uniform is actually a criminal offense?" She pulled out an official-looking document from her pocket, the morning light catching the official seal of Edinburgh Castle. James's face, already uncomfortable, paled visibly. "Criminal? But I was just trying to create content. This is ridiculous." His free hand reached instinctively for his phone, but it had fallen silent, the live stream continuing to record his humiliation without his narration. Thomas Chen, James's VP of marketing, had backed away into the crowd, pretending not to know his boss. Several other Silicon Valley colleagues had similarly distanced themselves, their own phones lowered in embarrassment. Marcus's grip hadn't wavered, but his next words carried a new tone, one that spoke of personal experience rather than just professional duty. "This uniform," he stated, each word clear and deliberate, "has been worn by soldiers who gave their lives defending what you treat as a tourist attraction." The crowd stirred at these words. Several veterans in the audience nodded solemnly, while others bowed their heads in respect. Even the most casual tourists seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "The buttons you so carelessly undid," Marcus continued, his voice carrying a hint of controlled anger for the first time, "bear the crest of regiments that have served with honor for centuries. Each thread in this jacket represents tradition, sacrifice and respect, concepts that clearly elude you." James's attempt at a dismissive laugh came out more like a nervous hiccup. "Look, I get it, you take this seriously, but in the modern world, tradition is meant to be challenged, disrupted. That's how progress." His words were cut short, as Marcus executed a perfect quarter turn, his movement so precise it could have been used in a military training video. The motion, while completely professional, served to remind everyone present that they were dealing with a highly trained serviceman, not a tourist attraction. "Progress," Marcus stated, his voice carrying across the now silent courtyard, "does not mean disrespecting the foundations it's built upon. Your modern world exists because of the sacrifices represented by this uniform." Claire Mackenzie had positioned herself strategically, her radio crackling quietly, with backup units standing by. She knew from experience that moments like these could go either way, toward understanding or toward escalation. In the crowd, little Emma MacDonald had found her voice again. "Da," she whispered, loud enough to be heard in the tense silence. "The guard is a real hero, isn't he?" Her father's proud nod spoke volumes, and several nearby tourists smiled in agreement. James's designer watch caught the light as he made one final attempt to twist his wrist free. The movement was futile. Marcus's grip was a perfect demonstration of controlled strength, neither harmful nor escapable. "Listen," James tried again, his voice now carrying a hint of desperation. "I can compensate you for any damage. Name your price. In Silicon Valley, we believe everything has a—" "This is Scotland," Marcus interrupted, his words falling like heavy stones in a deep well. "Some things cannot be bought, some traditions cannot be disrupted, some lines cannot be crossed without consequence." The morning wind had picked up again, carrying with it the distant sound of bagpipes from somewhere within the castle grounds. The music seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment, adding an almost cinematic quality to the scene. James Roberts, who had started the morning believing he could turn centuries of tradition into viral content, was about to learn exactly what those consequences looked like. His face, now stripped of all pretense, showed the first real signs of understanding just how badly he had misjudged this situation. The atmosphere in Edinburgh Castle's courtyard had transformed completely. What had started as a tourist's attempt at viral content had evolved into a powerful lesson about respect, tradition, and consequences. The crowd, which had been merely spectators moments ago, was now an active part of the unfolding drama. "I've got everything recorded," Sarah Chen announced loudly, her voice carrying across the courtyard, including the part where he deliberately vandalized a ceremonial uniform. Her phone was still streaming, but now her commentary had taken on a different tone. For everyone just joining the live stream, we're watching a Silicon Valley executive learn about respect the hard way. The comment section of her stream exploded with reactions. "Share it everywhere. Tag his company. Let's see him explain this to his board." The digital judgment was swift and merciless, a fact that was slowly dawning on James's increasingly pale face. Several Scottish tourists had moved closer, forming a loose semicircle that seemed to trap James between their disapproving stares and Marcus's unwavering presence. Maggie McPherson, the veteran tour guide, had begun quietly explaining to nearby visitors the historical significance of what they were witnessing. "The Highland Guard's uniform," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "represents more than just ceremony. Each button, each medal, each thread tells a story of sacrifice and honor. What we're seeing here is centuries of tradition standing firm against modern disrespect." James's colleagues from Silicon Valley had completely dissociated themselves. Now, some even pretending to be regular tourists taking photos of the castle. Thomas Chen had moved to the back of the crowd, frantically texting what appeared to be damage control messages to their company's PR team. "You know?" a gruff voice called out from the crowd, belonging to a weathered-looking man in a Royal Marines veteran's cap. "In my day, this kind of disrespect would have earned you more than just a stern talking to." Several other veterans nodded in agreement, their presence adding another layer of gravity to the situation. Claire Mackenzie's radio crackled again, and she responded in quiet, professional tones. The morning sun caught her security badge as she moved, creating a brief flash that drew James's attention. His eyes widened as he noticed more security personnel quietly positioning themselves around the courtyard. "Everything is being recorded," another tourist shouted, his Australian accent clear in the morning air. "My YouTube channel has 500,000 subscribers, mate, and they're all watching you make a complete fool of yourself." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of languages and accents all sharing the same tone of disapproval. Japanese tourists whispered about respect and honor. German visitors discussed cultural sensitivity, and Americans shook their heads at their countrymen's behavior. Little Emma MacDonald, still holding her father's hand, had become an unexpected voice of conscience. "Why is he still not saying sorry, Da?" her clear voice carried across the courtyard. "Mum says we always have to say sorry when we do something wrong." The simple wisdom of the child's words seemed to hit James harder than any of the adult criticism. His face, already uncomfortable, flushed a deeper shade of red. The designer sunglasses, now hanging uselessly from his collar, seemed to symbolize his stripped-away pretenses. "Look," James tried again, his voice having lost all its previous arrogance. "This has gone far enough. I'll make a donation to the castle, whatever you want. In Silicon Valley, we have ways of handling PR situations like—" "This isn't a PR situation," Marcus interrupted, his voice level but carrying an edge that made James flinch. "This is about respect, something no amount of money can buy." The crowd's reaction was immediate and approving. Several people clapped, while others nodded vigorously. Sarah Chen's live stream comments were scrolling faster than ever, the global audience growing by the minute. "We've identified him!" someone in the crowd called out, waving their phone. "James Roberts, CEO of Disruptech Solutions. Wait until their shareholders see this." The announcement sparked a new wave of phone activity as people began searching and sharing his information. James's face went from red to pale in an instant. The implications of his actions were finally starting to sink in. His carefully cultivated image as a bold, tradition-disrupting innovator was crumbling in real time, replaced by footage of him being firmly but professionally held in check by a Highland Guard he had tried to humiliate. "The castle's social media team has been notified," Claire Mackenzie announced calmly, her phone in her free hand. "They're requesting all footage be tagged with dying Edinburgh Castle respect for proper documentation of the incident." The hashtag spread through the crowd like wildfire, phones lighting up as people began tagging and sharing their recordings. James Roberts, who had started the morning thinking he would create viral content, was indeed going viral, but not in the way he had planned. "Should we call the police?" someone suggested loudly, causing another ripple through the crowd. The morning sun seemed to have lost its warmth as James realized just how badly his content creation had backfired. The ancient walls of Edinburgh Castle had witnessed countless moments of historical significance, but the scene unfolding in its courtyard was about to become a very modern kind of landmark event. As James Roberts stood frozen, his wrist still, held in Marcus Thompson's professional grip, the unmistakable sound of official footsteps approaching cut through the morning air. Major William Campbell, head of castle security and a decorated veteran himself, emerged from the shadow archway. His appearance commanded immediate attention. The perfect press of his uniform, the quiet authority in his stride, and the mixture of military bearing and administrative power he carried as naturally as his perfectly polished shoes. "Well, well," Major Campbell's voice carried across the courtyard, his Edinburgh accent adding gravity to each word. "What do we have here?" He moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured and purposeful. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. Claire Mackenzie stepped forward to brief her superior, her voice crisp and professional. "Sir, the individual attempted to remove Guard Thompson's ceremonial jacket for what he termed viral content. We have multiple recordings of the incident, including his own live stream." The Major's eyebrows rose slightly as he surveyed the scene. His gaze swept from Marcus's perfectly maintained composure to James's increasingly disheveled state. The undone buttons of the ceremonial jacket seemed to accuse the Silicon Valley executive with each slight movement in the morning breeze. "Mr. Roberts," Major Campbell addressed James directly, causing him to start at the use of his name. "I believe you're the CEO of Disruptech Solutions, the company that recently made headlines for its Tradition is Dead advertising campaign." James's attempt at a confident smile came out more like a grimace. "Yes, that's correct. Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. In Silicon Valley, we have a different approach to—" "This isn't Silicon Valley, Mr. Roberts," Major Campbell interrupted, his tone suggesting he was speaking to a particularly slow child. "This is Edinburgh Castle, a place where tradition isn't just some outdated concept to be disrupted for social media entertainment." The crowd had grown utterly silent, phones still recording as the Major continued his measured approach. Even the ever-present Scottish wind seemed to have stilled to listen. "Are you aware?" Major Campbell continued, pulling out an official-looking document from his breast pocket, "of the Castle Regulations Act of 1892, specifically Section 7, Paragraph 3. He didn't wait for a response. "It explicitly states that interfering with a guard's uniform is an offense punishable by both fine and potential imprisonment." James's face, already pale, took on an almost ghostly hue. Imprisonment? But it was just for content. We could make a deal. My company has excellent lawyers, and we're always looking for innovative solutions to... Innovative solutions. Major Campbell's voice carried a note of incredulity. Mr. Roberts, what part of attempting to strip a ceremonial guard of his uniform strikes you as innovative? In the crowd, Sarah Chen's live stream had attracted several legal experts who were now commenting on the potential consequences. Their observations were being read aloud by various spectators, creating a chorus of legal implications that made James's shoulders sink lower with each passing moment. The uniform you so casually attempted to remove, Major Campbell continued, gesturing to Marcus's jacket, has been worn by generations of soldiers who defended this castle. Each button you undid represents years of service, sacrifice, and honor, concepts that apparently didn't factor into your content strategy. The morning sun had reached its full strength now, illuminating the scene with unforgiving clarity. James's designer clothes, which had seemed so impressive earlier, now looked garish and out of place against the castle's ancient stones. "Major," Claire Mackenzie interjected professionally, "we've received word from the Lord Provost's office. They're requesting a full incident report given the viral nature of the situation." A slight smile touched Major Campbell's lips. Viral nature. How fitting. He turned back to James. "It seems, Mr. Roberts, that you've achieved your goal of creating viral content, though perhaps not in the way you intended." The crowd's murmurs grew louder as people began sharing the Lord Provost's involvement on social media. The incident had transcended simple tourist misbehavior and was rapidly becoming an international incident. "Your options," Major Campbell stated, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military justice, "have become rather limited. We can proceed with formal charges, which would involve the police and likely international press coverage, or..." He let the word hang in the air, watching as James shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's still professional hold. The Silicon Valley executive's face showed the first real signs of understanding just how severely he had miscalculated his morning's entertainment. The morning sun cast long shadows across Edinburgh Castle's courtyard as James Roberts faced what was quickly becoming the most expensive social media stunt of his career. Major Campbell's presence had transformed what the Silicon Valley executive had imagined would be an entertaining viral video into something far more serious. "The Lord Provost," Major Campbell continued, his voice carrying the weight of official authority, "is particularly interested in how a CEO of your stature thought it appropriate to assault a ceremonial guard for social media entertainment." He pulled out an iPad, its screen displaying rapidly spreading news coverage of the incident. James's attempt at maintaining his tech executive composure crumbled further. "Assault? That's a bit extreme, isn't it? I was just trying to create engaging content. In Silicon Valley, we call this disruptive marketing." His voice trailed off as he noticed Major Campbell's expression harden. "Disruptive marketing." The Major's Scottish accent added a particular sting to the words. "Let me explain exactly what you've disrupted today, Mr. Roberts." He gestured to Marcus's uniform with precise movements. "Each button you undid represents a regiment that served with honor. The jacket you treated as a prop has been earned through years of service and dedication." The crowd had grown completely silent, phones still recording as James's face shifted through various shades of discomfort. Sarah Chen's live stream comments were now being dominated by corporate lawyers and PR experts, all predicting dire consequences for Disrupt Tech Solutions' stock prices. "Sir," Claire Mackenzie approached with her tablet, "Disrupt Tech's board of directors has issued an emergency statement. They're distancing themselves from Mr. Roberts' actions." She turned the screen towards the Major, though the crowd could see James's face fall as he caught a glimpse of the content. Thomas Chen, still hovering at the edge of the crowd, was frantically typing on his phone. "James," he called out, his voice strained, "our major investors are calling. The hashtag disrupted CEO is trending globally. We're losing partnerships by the minute." The morning wind carried the sound of bagpipes from somewhere within the castle, providing an ironically majestic soundtrack to James's continuing downfall. His designer clothes, which had seemed so impressive earlier, now made him look like a child playing dress-up among the ancient stones and centuries of tradition. "Mr. Roberts," Major Campbell's voice cut through the growing murmurs, "your actions today have succeeded in disrupting something. Your own career." He held up his phone, displaying a news alert. "Your board has called an emergency meeting. It seems they don't share your views on the value of tradition." James's face, already pale, turned almost grey. "They can't. I founded that company. I'm the face of Disrupt Tech. We're worth billions." His voice cracked as the reality of his situation finally began to sink in. "Worth," Marcus spoke for the first time since the Major's arrival, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who understood true value, "is not measured in dollars or stock prices. It's measured in respect, honor, and tradition. Everything. You tried to mock today." The crowd's reaction was immediate and approving. Several people clapped, while others nodded vigorously. Little Emma MacDonald's voice piped up again. "Da, the guard is teaching the mean man about being good, isn't he?" Major Campbell allowed himself a small smile at the child's observation. "Indeed he is, lass. Indeed he is." He turned back to James, his expression becoming official once more. "Now, Mr. Roberts, we have some paperwork to discuss. The Castle Regulations Act is quite specific about the consequences of interfering with the ceremonial guard." James's attempt at his usual confident smile had completely failed. "Surely we can handle this privately. My company's legal team." He trailed off as he saw the Major shake his head. "Your company's legal team," Claire Mackenzie interjected, reading from her tablet, "has just issued a statement saying they represent Disruptech Solutions, not James Roberts personally." The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the implications sank in. The morning sun seemed to spotlight James as he stood there, his Silicon Valley bravado stripped away layer by layer. His expensive watch caught the light, a final glimmer of the wealth and power that had seemed so important just hours ago. The morning sun had reached its zenith over Edinburgh Castle as the moment of final reckoning arrived for James Roberts. The Silicon Valley executive who had started his day planning to disrupt tradition now stood facing the consequences of his actions, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him like the ancient stones he had so casually disrespected. "Your options," Major Campbell stated, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military justice, "are quite straightforward now." He held up a formal document bearing the castle's official seal. "Option 1. We proceed with formal charges. Given the viral nature of your actions, this would involve a very public legal process." James swallowed hard, his designer collar suddenly feeling too tight. The crowd leaned in, phones still recording every moment of his humiliation. Sarah Chen's live stream had now attracted over 100,000 viewers, with corporate news networks beginning to pick up the story. "Option 2, the Major continued, his Edinburgh accent adding gravity to each word. "You issue a formal apology, right here, right now, in front of these witnesses. You'll also make a substantial donation to the Veterans Support Fund and sign a binding agreement never to approach Edinburgh Castle's ceremonial guards again." The courtyard fell silent as James processed his options. Even the ever-present Scottish wind seemed to hold its breath. Marcus Thompson still maintained his professional hold on James's wrist, his presence a constant reminder of the power of disciplined restraint. James started, his voice barely a whisper compared to his earlier bombastic performance. I choose option 2. The words seemed to physically pain him, each syllable stripped of the arrogance that had characterized his morning's entertainment. Major Campbell nodded curtly. Very well. Guard Thompson, you may release Mr. Roberts. Marcus's release was as professional as his grip had been, leaving James to awkwardly adjust his now wrinkled designer jacket. The apology, Claire Mackenzie prompted, her tablet ready to record, should address both the guard and the institution you've disrespected. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. James Roberts, CEO of DisruptTech Solutions, worth billions on paper just hours ago, now stood alone in the center of the courtyard. His Silicon Valley colleagues had completely abandoned him. His live stream had been cut off, and his company's stock was plummeting with each passing minute. He began, then cleared his throat and started again, louder this time. James Roberts, sincerely apologize for my disrespectful actions today. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. I apologize to Guard Thompson, to Edinburgh Castle, and to everyone who understands the value of tradition and respect. Values I failed to appreciate. The crowd watched in silence as James reached for his wallet with trembling hands. The donation, he asked quietly. How much? £50,000, Major Campbell stated firmly. Payable immediately via bank transfer to the Veterans Support Fund. He held up his tablet, displaying the account details. James's face paled further, but he nodded. The morning sun caught his expensive watch as he made the transfer, the same watch that had gleamed so confidently during his earlier performance, now seeming to mock its owner's fall from grace. Transaction confirmed, Claire Mackenzie announced professionally, checking her tablet. The crowd murmured approvingly, several veterans in the audience nodding with satisfaction. Marcus Thompson, who had returned to his post, stood tall and dignified, his uniform once again pristine. The buttons James had so carelessly undone were now properly fastened, each one catching the light like a small reminder of the power of tradition. "Da," little Emma MacDonald's voice carried across the courtyard. "Is this what Mum means when she says pride comes before a fall?" Her father's gentle laugh was joined by several others in the crowd, the innocent observation cutting through the tension. Major Campbell turned to address the gathered tourists, his voice carrying the authority of his position. Let this serve as a reminder to all visitors, Edinburgh Castle is not just a tourist attraction. It is a living symbol of history, tradition, and respect. Those who forget this, he glanced meaningfully at James, tend to receive rather expensive reminders. The crowd's response was immediate and approving. Several people applauded, while others nodded in solemn agreement. The morning's drama had transformed from potential viral entertainment into a powerful lesson about respect and consequence. The midday sun cast a golden glow over Edinburgh Castle's ancient stones as the morning's dramatic events began to settle. The crowd, though still substantial, had shifted from spectators of a confrontation to witnesses of a powerful lesson in respect and tradition. James Roberts stood at the edge of the courtyard, his Silicon Valley confidence replaced by a humble demeanor that seemed entirely foreign to his usual character. An elderly Scottish gentleman, leaning on a polished wooden cane, made his way through the crowd. His weathered face and military bearing spoke of years of service, and the medals on his jacket clinked softly as he approached Marcus Thompson's post. The guard remained at attention, but there was a subtle recognition in his eyes as the veteran drew near. 30 years I served, the old soldier announced, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. And never did I think I'd see the day when someone would treat our uniform as a prop for social media. He turned to face James, who seemed to shrink further under the veteran's steady gaze. Young man, the veteran continued, addressing James directly, you came here thinking tradition was something to be disrupted. But tradition is what holds us together when everything else falls apart. The morning wind carried his words across the courtyard, where tourists and locals alike nodded in agreement. Claire Mackenzie approached with a final piece of paperwork. Mr. Roberts, you'll need to sign this formal acknowledgement of your actions and their consequences. She held out a tablet displaying an official document. It will be kept on record at the castle and shared with relevant authorities. James's hands trembled slightly as he signed the digital form. His designer watch, which had sparkled so confidently earlier, now seemed to weigh heavily on his wrist. The sound of his finger scratching across the screen seemed to echo off the ancient walls, each stroke another admission of his monumental mistake. "Sir," Sarah Chen called out, addressing Major Campbell, "my viewers are asking about the significance of the Guard's uniform. Would it be appropriate to share that history?" Her live stream had evolved from capturing a tourist's arrogance to documenting an important lesson in cultural respect. Major Campbell nodded approvingly. Indeed it would. He gestured to Marcus's now restored uniform. Each element of this uniform tells a story. The buttons Mr. Roberts so carelessly undid bear the crest of regiments that served with distinction. The jacket itself is cut to a pattern that dates back centuries. The crowd listened intently as the Major continued his explanation. Even James, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, seemed to be truly hearing about tradition for the first time, rather than seeing it as something to be disrupted for profit. Little Emma MacDonald had made her way to the front of the crowd, her father close behind. She looked up at Marcus with undisguised admiration. "May I ask a question, sir?" she said politely, addressing the guard with natural respect that made several onlookers smile. Marcus, still maintaining his professional stance, gave an almost imperceptible nod. Major Campbell stepped in to act as intermediary. "Go ahead." "And lass," he encouraged with a gentle smile, "is it hard to stand so still and be so brave when people are being mean?" Emma's innocent question cut through all pretense, reaching the heart of the morning's events. Several phones captured the moment, but now the recording seemed respectful rather than exploitative. Major Campbell knelt to Emma's level, his own medals catching the sunlight. "That's an excellent question. You see, being a guard isn't just about standing still. It's about standing for something bigger than yourself, something worth protecting." The crowd murmured in approval as Emma nodded seriously, clearly processing this important lesson. Her father placed a proud hand on her shoulder, while several other parents in the crowd drew their own children closer. Maggie McPherson, the veteran tour guide, had begun quietly sharing the history of the Highland Guard with nearby tourists. Her words carried the weight of decades of experience, turning the morning's incident into an educational moment about respect, tradition, and consequences. "You see," she explained to her attentive audience, "what happened here today isn't just about one man's mistake. It's about the importance of understanding and respecting the traditions that shape our world." Her Scottish accent added authenticity to each word, making the lesson feel as timeless as the castle itself. Days after the incident at Edinburgh Castle, its impact continued to ripple through both traditional and social media. The video of James Roberts' attempt to disrupt tradition and its spectacular backfire had become a viral sensation, but not in the way he had originally intended. Major news networks picked up the story, running headlines like "Tech CEO Learns Costly Lesson in Respect" and "Tradition Stands Firm, How a Highland Guard Taught Silicon Valley a Lesson." Social media platforms were flooded with clips of the incident, each accompanied by thousands of comments praising Marcus Thompson's professionalism and condemning James's arrogance. Disrupt Tech Solutions' board of directors had called an emergency meeting, The company, which had built its brand on disrupting traditional industries, found itself facing a massive public relations crisis. Their stock price had taken a significant hit, and several major partners had publicly distanced themselves from the company. At Edinburgh Castle, Marcus Thompson continued his duties with the same unwavering dedication. If anything, the incident had only enhanced the respect visitors showed to the Highland Guards. Tourists now approached with notable reverence, many taking time to read the newly installed plaques explaining the historical significance of the Guards' uniforms and traditions. Claire Mackenzie reported a marked decrease in inappropriate behavior toward the Guards. "It's amazing how one incident can change people's perspectives," she noted during a staff meeting. "Visitors seem to understand now that these uniforms represent something far more meaningful than a photo opportunity." The Veterans Support Fund reported an unexpected surge in donations following the incident. James Roberts's forced contribution had inspired others to voluntarily support the cause, leading to the creation of a new program specifically focused on preserving military traditions and educating the public about their significance. Little Emma MacDonald had become something of a local celebrity. Her innocent questions during the confrontation had resonated with people worldwide, reminding everyone that respect and honor are values best learned early. Her father reported that she now wanted to become a historian, to help people understand why tradition matters. James Roberts had resigned as CEO of Disruptech Solutions, his position becoming untenable as the company struggled to rebuild its image. His last public statement was a lengthy apology, acknowledging that true innovation doesn't require disrespecting the foundations it builds upon. The incident became a case study in corporate training programs worldwide, teaching executives about cultural sensitivity and the importance of respecting traditional institutions. Business schools added it to their ethics curricula, using it as a perfect example of how arrogance and disregard for cultural values can lead to significant personal and professional consequences. Edinburgh Castle itself saw an increase in visitors, many coming specifically to learn about the Highland Guards and their traditions. Maggie McPherson's tours became so popular that she had to start a waiting list as people sought to hear her first-hand account of the day tradition stood firm against modern arrogance. As the sun set over Edinburgh Castle each evening, Marcus Thompson completed his duty with the same dedication he had always shown. The incident had changed nothing about how he performed his role, yet it had changed everything about how others perceived it. The legacy of that autumn morning served as a powerful reminder that in a world racing to disrupt everything, some traditions deserve to stand unchanged, guarding not just ancient stones, but timeless values of respect, honor, and dignity. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of tradition triumphing over arrogance, you won't want to miss our next incredible stories. Don't forget to hit subscribe and that notification bell to catch these amazing stories of justice and respect. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on today's story, and let us know which video you want to watch next.